She was pregnant, alone and without a future, until she agreed to marry an old millionaire to save her child's future. If you enjoy love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The rain lashed against the Mercedes windows as Emily watched the Morgan mansion emerge from the mist like a ghost ship. Built in neoclassical style, with imposing columns and geometrically perfect gardens, the property seemed to suck all the light around, it transforming the autumn afternoon into premature night. The driver, a grey-haired gentleman who hadn't said a single word during the entire journey, smoothly parked in front of the main staircase. Emily adjusted the simple dress she had bought especially for that day, her last attempt to look presentable. With the little money she still had in her account, her hands trembled slightly as she touched the small bulge in her belly, still imperceptible under the silky fabric. 3 months, 12 weeks of a life growing inside her, nourished by her silent tears and double shifts at the municipal hospital emergency room. "Miss, you may enter. Mr. Morgan awaits you in his office." The butler's voice sounded respectful, but there was something in his eyes, pity perhaps, that made Emily's stomach turn. She nodded, following him through the monumental entrance hall, where a crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows on the walls covered in dark green wallpaper. The interior of the mansion was even more oppressive than its facade. Huge paintings decorated the walls, but Emily noticed that some were covered with dark fabrics, as if certain memories needed to be veiled. The silence was dense, broken only by the sound of her low heels on the marble floor and the distant ticking of some antique clock. They stopped in front of massive double wooden doors. The butler knocked twice before opening them, announcing her presence. "Mr. Morgan, Miss Emily Parker." Richard Morgan was standing by the window, hands crossed behind his back, watching the rain that was now falling harder. He didn't turn immediately. For a few seconds that seemed eternal, Emily had time to absorb his figure. Tall, broad shoulders under an impeccably tailored suit, grey hair at the temples that only accentuated his aristocratic posture. When he finally turned to her, his eyes, so light blue they bordered on translucent, pierced her like ice needles. "Please sit down." His voice was deep, controlled. There was no warmth in it, but no hostility either. It was the tone of someone accustomed to conducting difficult negotiations. Emily obeyed, choosing one of the leather armchairs in front of the massive desk. Her legs were shaking, but she forced herself to maintain an upright posture. She wasn't there as a beggar. She was there as what exactly? A woman desperate enough to accept an arranged marriage with a man 29 years her senior. "I imagine Mr. Carter explained the terms of our agreement." Richard moved to his chair, sitting with the studied elegance of someone who had transformed every gesture into a demonstration of power. "Yes, sir." Emily swallowed hard, her hands intertwining on her lap. The lawyer had been very clear. Legal marriage with complete separation of assets, but with generous provisions for her and the child, a contract of absolute confidentiality, and the requirement that she move to the mansion immediately after the ceremony. "And you are willing to accept all the conditions?" His eyes studied her as if they could read every thought behind her furrowed brow. Emily took a deep breath. "I am." Her voice came out firmer than she expected. "But I need to know why. Why me?" A humorless smile curved Richard's lips. "Because you have nothing to lose, Miss Parker, and people who have nothing to lose are the only ones truly trustworthy." The brutal frankness of the answer hit her like a slap. But he was right. What did she have to lose? The job that barely paid her bills, the small rented apartment where she cried every night. Dignity had already been taken by Andrew, along with his empty promises of eternal love. "And the baby?" she finally asked, her hand instinctively protecting her belly. "Do you accept it?" Richard stood up, walking to a side table where a crystal bottle contained an amber liquid. He poured himself a drink, the precise movements betraying years of practice. "The baby is a fundamental part of the agreement, Miss Parker. In fact, it's the main reason." He turned to face her again, and for a moment Emily saw something different in his eyes, a shadow of emotion quickly suppressed. "I need an heir, and you need security. It's a fair exchange." And what about us? The question escaped before she could contain it. Will the marriage be only on paper? Richard took a sip of his drink, considering the question. We will be discreet, respectful. You will have your own suite in the east, wing of the mansion. I will not demand intimacies, but I will expect absolute loyalty and even greater discretion. Emily nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and an inexplicable pang of disappointment. No, impossible. She should be grateful, not to have to submit to the desires of a man who could be her father. There is one more thing. Richard placed the glass on the table with a soft tinkle. There are areas of the house that are strictly forbidden. The west wing of the second floor is closed. Don't try to enter there. Never. That is a non-negotiable condition. The tone of his voice left no room for questions. Emily agreed, although her mind was already bubbling with curiosity about what could be hidden in that mysterious wing. The contract is ready to be signed. He indicated a folder on the desk. You have 1 hour to read and sign it if you so wish. Mr. Carter is on his way to serve as a witness. Emily picked up the folder with trembling hands. The pages were full of complex legal terms, but some numbers jumped out at her, values she had never dreamed of seeing associated with her name. Why such a hurry? She asked, still leafing through the document. Because, Miss Parker, there are things that need to be done while we have the courage to do them. Richard headed for the door, stopping only for a moment. And because ghosts don't wait forever. With those enigmatic words, he left her alone in the office, the sound of rain marking the passage of minutes as she stared at the contract that would change her life forever. Emily knew she should read every word, analyze every clause, but her eyes kept returning to the window, watching the gardens being whipped by the storm. Somewhere in that house, secrets waited to be discovered, and she, with a child in her womb and desperation in her heart, was about to become part of them. When Mr. Carter arrived an hour later, he found the contract signed on the table and Emily standing by the window in the same place where Richard had been before. She watched the rain with a distant expression, as if already rehearsing the role she would have to play for the next few years. The lawyer cleared his throat softly. It's done then. Emily turned, and there was a new determination in her gaze. Yes, it's done. Her hand rested on her belly where her child grew oblivious to the complexities of the world that awaited it. May God help us. Mr. Carter collected the documents with professional efficiency, but before leaving he hesitated. Miss Parker, Emily, there's still time to back out. She smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. No, Doctor, there isn't. In fact, I don't think there ever was. When she was alone again, Emily allowed a single tear to trickle down her face. It wasn't of sadness nor of regret. It was the last tear of the woman she had been until that moment. From now on she would be Mrs. Morgan, and Mrs. Morgans, she suspected, didn't have the luxury of crying. The ceremony was quick and discreet, held in the office of a judge who was a friend of the Morgan family. Emily wore a simple ivory dress, hastily purchased at a department store. Richard maintained an austere countenance throughout the process, as if he were closing another business contract. There was no party, no guests, just the necessary witnesses, and the inevitable air of formality that permeated every moment. The return to the mansion was silent. The rain of recent days had given way to a clear, cold autumn sky, but the climate inside the car was even colder than the air outside. Emily watched the landscape change through the window, trying to process the reality that this would now be her home. Her husband, the word sounded strange even in her thoughts, kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his hands firm on the steering wheel of his private Bentley. Your things have already been taken to your quarters, Richard broke. The silence when they reached the entrance to the property. Martha, the housekeeper, will show you everything you need to know about the house. Emily nodded, her throat suddenly dry. The few boxes with her belongings would seem ridiculously inadequate in that environment of luxury and tradition. Thank you. Martha was waiting at the entrance, a middle-aged lady with grey hair tied in a severe bun and astute eyes that seemed to evaluate Emily's every movement. Her smile was polite but distant, as if she had already seen many Mrs. Morgans. "Pass through those doors, and this way, ma'am." Martha gestured toward the main staircase. Richard had already disappeared toward his office, leaving Emily alone with the housekeeper. The tour of the mansion was a lesson in the geography of power. Each room seemed to tell a different story about the Morgan family. Austere ancestral portraits, period furniture worth more than everything Emily had ever owned in her life, art objects carefully arranged as silent reminders of the fortune and influence that now surrounded her. "You will have your own suite in the East Wing." Martha opened the doors to a set of rooms larger than her entire former apartment. Bedroom, closet, bathroom, and a small living room. Mr. Morgan was quite specific about your needs. Emily walked through the space with hesitant steps, touching the velvet curtains, the marble fireplace, the canopy of the king-size bed. Everything was in shades of petrol, blue, and gold, elegant without being ostentatious. It's very beautiful." "Breakfast is served at 8, Martha continued, ignoring the comment. "Lunch at noon and dinner at 7. Mr. Morgan rarely eats at home, but he expects you to keep the schedule. The kitchen is at your disposal outside those hours, of course." The formality of the routine made her feel as if she were in a very exclusive hotel, not in her new home. "And what about my prenatal care?" "Dr. Richardson, the family doctor, will come for regular consultations right here," Martha responded promptly. "Mr. Morgan has already arranged everything." Of course he had. Richard Morgan seemed to have thought of every detail, every possible need, except, perhaps, the basic human need for connection, for warmth. When Martha finally left her alone, Emily sat on the edge of the immense bed, feeling smaller than ever. The silence of the house enveloped her like a physical presence, broken only by the distant ticking of some ancient clock. The first weeks dragged on, in a surreal routine. Emily wandered the corridors like a ghost, trying to find her place in this new and strange world. The employees were polite but kept their distance, as if they knew something she didn't know, as if they were just waiting for the inevitable. Richard was an absent presence. He left early, returned late, and on the rare occasions when they met, they exchanged only necessary words. But Emily could feel his eyes on her when she thought she wasn't being observed. A complex look, mixing something that seemed like curiosity with an ancient and deep sadness. The pregnancy nausea began to worsen, and Emily found herself bent over the marble toilet in her luxurious bathroom, alone with her discomfort. It was on one of those mornings, when she emerged pale from the bathroom, that she found something unexpected on her bed. An old book about pregnancy and a crystal bottle containing crystallized ginger. There was no note, but the gesture, probably Martha's work, touched her more deeply than any words could have done. It was the first sign that someone in that house cared about her well-being beyond contractual obligations. The nights were the worst. Alone in her immense suite, Emily found herself watching the moon through the tall windows, one hand always resting on her belly, which was beginning to show the first visible signs of pregnancy. Sometimes she heard music coming from somewhere in the house, distant, melancholy piano notes that seemed to carry all the weight of the secrets those walls kept. It was on one of those sleepless nights that she first noticed the shadows moving in the garden. From her window, she could see Richard walking alone among the precisely trimmed flower beds, always stopping in front of an angel statue that was partially hidden by a set of cypress trees. He would stay there, motionless, for long minutes, as if silently conversing with some invisible ghost. The scene was repeated several nights, always at the same time, always with the same silent ritual. Emily began to mark the dates. It was always in the first week of the month. There was a pattern there, a story she still couldn't decipher. The mystery of the West Wing also consumed her. The locked doors seemed to call her every time she passed. By them, and sometimes when the wind blew strong, she could swear she heard sounds coming from that direction, like a distant cry, or perhaps just the whistle of the wind between the ancient cracks. It was during a particularly silent afternoon that Emily decided to explore the library, one of the few places in the house where she truly felt at peace. The books, at least, didn't judge her, didn't keep secrets. As she browsed the shelves, her fingers brushing the leather spines, a particular volume caught her attention. A photo album, half hidden among tomes of ancient history. With her heart racing, she pulled it from the shelf. The first pages showed photos of the mansion in different eras, newer, older, always imposing. But it was a photograph in the middle of the album that made her blood freeze. Richard, visibly younger, next to a woman who could be her twin sister. The shock was so great that the album slipped from her trembling hands, scattering some loose photos on the floor. As she bent down to collect them, she heard footsteps, and when she looked up, she found Richard standing at the door of the library, his face a mask of contained fury. "I thought I had made it clear that there are places in this house that do not concern you." His voice was low, dangerous. Emily stood up, still holding one of the photos. This wasn't in the West Wing. It was here, in the library. "The library is closed from now on." Richard crossed the space between them in large strides, snatching the photo from her hand. "Go to your quarters." "No." The word came out before she could contain it. "I'm not a child to be sent to my room. I'm your wife, even if only on paper, and I deserve to know what kind of ghosts I'm sharing with you in this house." For a moment, it seemed that Richard was going to explode. His light eyes became even more glacial, and a vein pulsed in his temple. But then, something changed in his expression, as if a mask had momentarily cracked. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said, his voice now laden with an emotion that Emily couldn't identify. "There are things that are better left buried." "Like her?" Emily pointed to the photo he was still holding. "Who was she, Richard?" He looked at the photograph as if it could burn his fingers. "Someone who no longer exists. Someone you should never have known, not even through an image." With that, he put the photo in his jacket pocket and left the library, leaving Emily alone with her multiplied questions. But one thing had changed. For the first time since she had arrived at that house, she had seen a crack in Richard Morgan's armor. And through that crack, she had glimpsed something that seemed painfully human. The days following the incident in the library were marked by an even denser silence. Richard began to dine at home more frequently, but his presence was like a contained storm, heavy, charged with unreleased electricity. Emily could feel his eyes on her during meals, studying her every movement as if looking for something familiar in her gestures. The pregnancy advanced, and with it came changes that not even the silence of the mansion could ignore. Her body transformed day by day, the small life inside her making its presence increasingly evident. Dr. Richardson, a white-haired gentleman with gentle manners, was the only one who seemed genuinely happy during his fortnightly visits. "The baby is developing perfectly," he announced during a consultation, while Emily was lying on the improvised examination table in her room. "Would you like to know the gender?" Emily hesitated, her hand unconsciously caressing the belly that was now visible under her loose dress. "Yes," she finally answered. "Please." "It's a girl." The doctor smiled, adjusting his glasses. "A little Miss Morgan." The news hit Emily like a punch in the stomach. A girl, a daughter. For some reason, this made everything more real, more frightening. When the doctor left, she remained lying down, silent tears streaming down her face. This is how Richard found her, minutes later. He stopped at the door, his tall figure casting a long shadow on the wooden floor. The doctor informed me. A girl. Emily quickly wiped away her tears, trying to compose herself. "Yes." Richard crossed the room to the window, his back to her. "You're crying." "It's nothing." She sat up on the bed, adjusting her dress. "Just hormones. Don't lie to me." His voice had a different tone, no longer the usual ice, but something closer to fatigue. "You're scared, afraid that your daughter will grow up in this house of shadows." The frankness of the observation caught her off guard. "You can't blame me for being afraid. This house, your secrets." Richard turned to face her, and for the first time Emily saw something different in his eyes, vulnerability. "Come with me." He didn't wait for a response. simply left the room in long strides. Emily followed him, curiosity overcoming apprehension. To her surprise, Richard led her to the west wing, the forbidden area of the house. Her heart raced when he took a set of keys from his pocket and opened one of the closed doors. The room that was revealed was covered with white sheets, furniture, paintings, all protected from the dust of time. Richard walked to one of the windows and opened the heavy curtains, letting the late afternoon light enter the preserved environment. This was her room, he said simply, removing the sheet from a portrait on the wall. The same woman from the library photo smiled from the canvas, her eyes surprisingly alive despite the colors slightly faded by time. "Who was she?" Emily asked softly, approaching. "The portrait. Elizabeth." The name came out like a prayer from Richard's lips. "My first wife, and the last person who managed to make me feel something beyond emptiness." Emily looked at the painting more closely. The resemblance between them was indeed remarkable. The same large eyes, the same face shape, even the way the hair fell over the shoulders. What happened to her? Richard ran his hand over his face, an unusually human gesture for someone always so controlled. "She was pregnant, like you. She was a nurse at one of the Foundation's hospitals, young, full of life. She made me believe that there was still room for love in this old, cynical world." He paused, his hand lightly touching the frame of the portrait. There were complications in the delivery. The baby, a boy, didn't survive, and Elizabeth, she never recovered. 6 months later, I found her here, in this room. She had taken an overdose of medication. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Emily could feel her own baby moving, as if responding to the sadness of the story. "Why are you showing me this now?" she finally asked. Richard turned to her, his light eyes shining with what could be contained tears. "Because you deserve to know why I chose you, why I brought you to this house. Because I look like her." It wasn't a question. No. The answer surprised her. "Because when you walked into my office that day, pregnant and scared but still dignified, you reminded me not of the Elizabeth I lost, but of the Elizabeth I met, the one who still believed that love could conquer anything." Emily felt her own tears begin to fall. "And you? Do you still believe that?" Richard took a step toward her, his hand hesitating in the air before touching her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. It was the first time he had touched her since the day of the wedding. "I don't know. But when I see you, when I see how you protect this child you carry, I begin to remember what it was like to believe." His touch was surprisingly gentle, and Emily found herself leaning her face toward that unexpected caress. For a moment, they remained like this, connected by something deeper than contracts or social conventions. "Your daughter will not grow up in a house of shadows," Richard finally said, his voice hoarse. "I'll make sure of that, even if I have to face my own ghosts." When he pulled away, Emily felt the void of his absence as a physical pain. But something had changed between them. A wall had fallen, a secret had been shared. And in place of fear, something different began to be born, something she wasn't ready to name yet. That night, alone in her bed, Emily dreamed of Elizabeth. Not the Elizabeth of the portrait, smiling and full of life, but a different Elizabeth, pale, sad, sitting at the covered piano in the music room. In the dream, she played a melody that Emily knew but couldn't identify. And when she turned to look at her eyes were full of tears. "Take care of him," the Elizabeth of the dream whispered. "He can still learn to love again." Emily woke up with the sound of the piano still echoing in her ears. But when she opened her eyes, the mansion was silent. Only the wind whispered among the trees in the garden, as if it carried with it the secrets of all the lives that had passed through those ancient walls. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the gentle movements of her daughter. "We're going to make this work," she murmured into the darkness. "For you, for me, and for him." On the other side of the mansion, in his own lonely room, Richard Morgan was also awake, looking at the portrait of Elizabeth that he now kept on his bedside table. For the first time in years, the sight didn't bring just pain. It also brought a small, timid hope of redemption. The revelation about Elizabeth changed something fundamental in the dynamic between Emily and Richard. The silence of the mansion, once oppressive, now seemed charged with unspoken possibilities. Dinners became more frequent, and gradually words began to fill the space between them. It was during one of those dinners that Richard surprised her with an unexpected question. "Did you play the piano before coming here?" Emily raised her eyes from her plate, meeting his intense gaze from across the mahogany table. "Yes, I studied for a few years as a child. How did you know?" "Sometimes, when I pass by the music room late at night, I hear you playing." He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving hers. The same melody always, Chopin's Nocturne. Emily felt her face warm. She had started playing a few weeks after the conversation about Elizabeth, when she discovered the piano in the music room. It was always late at night when insomnia and restless thoughts led her to wander around the house. "I'm sorry, I didn't know I was bothering." "It doesn't bother me." Richard interrupted her, his voice surprisingly soft. "It's comforting. It makes the house seem less dead." The comment hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Emily could feel something changing in the air, a different tension forming. "Why always the same music?" he asked after a moment of silence. Emily hesitated, her hand unconsciously caressing her 6-month belly. "It was the music my mother played for me to sleep when I was little, before she left. Now I play it for our daughter." Richard became very quiet, his face a mask of contained emotions. Then, to Emily's surprise, he stood up and extended his hand. "Come with me." She accepted his hand, feeling the unexpected warmth of his touch. Richard led her to the music room, a room she had only visited during her solitary nocturnal incursions. But now, with the lights on and Richard by her side, the environment seemed different, more alive, more present. "Play for me," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Emily sat at the piano, feeling the weight of Richard's gaze on her. Her hands trembled slightly when they touched the keys, but as soon as the first note sounded, something familiar took over her. The melody flowed like water, filling every corner of the room with its sweet melancholy. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't notice Richard approaching until she felt his presence behind her. He placed his hands on her shoulders, a touch so light it could be imagination. Emily continued playing, but her heart began to beat faster, responding to something primitive and undeniable in the air. Elizabeth played this music too. His voice was low, hoarse. But not like this, not with so much life. The last notes died in the air, leaving only the sound of their breathing in the silence that followed. Emily could feel the heat of Richard's hands through the thin fabric, of her dress, each point of contact sending waves of electricity through her skin. "Richard," she began, not knowing exactly what she wanted to say. He interrupted her, his hands sliding from her shoulders to her arms in a hesitant caress. "Don't say anything, please." Emily closed her eyes, letting herself be carried away by the sensation of his touch. Was it wrong? Probably. But at that moment, with the music still echoing in her ears and the baby moving gently in her womb, nothing seemed more right. Richard leaned in, his lips lightly brushing the curve of her neck. Emily shivered, a sigh escaping her lips. "This is madness," she murmured. "Yes," he agreed, his voice a whisper against her skin. "Complete madness." But when Emily turned to face him, what she saw in his eyes wasn't madness. It was desire, mixed with something deeper, more frightening. Richard touched her face with a delicacy that seemed impossible for such strong hands, his fingers tracing the contour of her jaw as if she were made of porcelain. "You are not her," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "You never were her. And perhaps that's exactly the point." Before Emily could respond, he kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of years of solitude, of repressed desires, of unacknowledged needs. His hands entangled in her hair, pulling her closer, while she clung to the lapel of his jacket as if he were her only anchor in reality. When they finally separated, breathless, Something had irrevocably changed between them. The air seemed denser, charged with possibilities and dangers. "This changes everything," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. Richard took a step back, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of palpable frustration. "I know, and I can't promise that I know how to deal with this." "Neither do I." She stood up, one hand resting on her prominent belly. "But I think we're already past the point where we can pretend it doesn't exist." He looked at her for a long time, his light eyes stormy with conflicting emotions. "I don't want you to think this has anything to do with the past. With her." "I don't think so." Emily took a step toward him, placing a hand on his chest, feeling his heart beating strongly under the thin fabric of his shirt. "I think it has to do with the present, with us, with all the unspoken things that float in this house." Richard covered her hand with his, the contrast between their skins highlighting the wedding ring they both wore, a symbol that until then was just a formality, but now seemed to pulse with new meanings. "I don't know if I can be the man you deserve," he admitted, his voice low and intense. "There is so much that you still don't know." "Then let me discover." Emily moved closer, eliminating the space between them. "Not as your substitute, not as a contract, but as myself, as the woman who is carrying your daughter, and who, against all odds, is falling in love with you." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with truth and vulnerability. For a moment, Richard seemed frozen, as if her words had hit some deep and protected place within him. Then slowly he pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You will be my ruin," he murmured against her skin. "And perhaps that's exactly what I need." They stayed like that for a long time, embraced in the music room as night advanced around the mansion. The silent piano was their only witness, guardian of yet another secret in that house of mysteries. But this, at least, was a secret born, not of pain or tragedy, but of possibility and hope. A secret that perhaps could begin to heal the old wounds that haunted those walls. The weeks following the kiss in the music room were a delicate dance between desire and caution. Richard and Emily orbited around each other like newly discovered planets, testing gravities and distances, learning new rhythms of approach and withdrawal. Dinners were now moments charged with unresolved tension, each look, each accidental brush of hands sending waves of electricity through the air. Richard began to arrive home earlier, and Emily often found him in his office, his tie already loose around his neck, his eyes tired but attentive when she entered. It was during one of those nights that she found the letters. Emily had developed the habit of bringing tea to Richard in his office, a transparent excuse to see him, but one neither of them questioned. On that particular night, he had been called away for an emergency at the company, leaving the room temporarily empty. The safe was ajar, a lapse so atypical it almost seemed an invitation from fate. Emily hesitated for only a moment before giving in to the curiosity that had consumed her since she arrived at that house. Inside, beyond the expected documents, was a carved wooden box, old and well preserved. Her hands were trembling when she opened it. Dozens of letters, some yellowed by time, others more recent, all written in the same elegant handwriting. The first was dated 20 years ago. "My love, the baby kicked today for the first time. I thought of you immediately, of how your eyes would shine when feeling our son moving. Sometimes I wondered if we made the right choice keeping everything a secret. But then I remember the empire you need to protect, the threats that surround us, and I know it's better this way. Only 3 months left now. 3 months until we can be a real family. With all my love, Elizabeth." Emily felt her own baby move, as if responding to the emotion the letter provoked. Her hands trembled as she picked up another letter, this one dated a few weeks later. "Richard, something is wrong. I have terrible dreams every night. I dream of blood and loss, of hospital corridors that have no end. Dr. Carter says it's normal, that every pregnant woman has fears, but this is different. I need to see you. I need you to tell me that everything will be all right, Please come today, E. The next letter made her heart stop. They know. I don't know how, but they know about the baby. I received a warning today. If I don't disappear, they'll tell everything. To the press. Your empire would fall within days, everything you've built, destroyed by our story. I can't let that happen. You mean too much to too many people. The hospitals, the foundations, how many lives would be affected? I've made a decision. When the baby is born, I'll vanish. I'll give him a life away from all this. It's the only way. Forgive me. E. The sound of footsteps in the corridor made Emily freeze. Quickly, she put the letters back in the box, stored it in the safe, and closed the heavy door, her heart beating so hard it felt like it might explode. Richard entered seconds later, looking more tired than ever. Emily, what are you doing here so late? She hesitated, guilt and revelation fighting in her chest. I brought your tea. He observed her for a long moment, his clear eyes seeming to see through her lie. You found the letters, didn't you? Emily felt the blood drain from her face. How? The safe. Richard approached, touching the metal door with a sad familiarity. I left it open on purpose. I knew your curiosity would eventually bring you here. Why? The question came out as a whisper. Richard sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking much older. Because you deserve to know the whole truth, especially now. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a yellowed envelope. This arrived today, after 20 years of silence. Emily took the envelope with trembling hands. The handwriting was the same as the other letters, but more trembling, less sure. Richard, our son, is alive, and he is looking for you. I don't have much time. The disease is winning, but I needed you to know he grew up strong and good. He has your eyes, your determination. And now that he knows the truth about his origins, he wants to meet his father. His name is Andrew. Forgive me for all these years of silence. It was the only way I found to protect you both. With eternal love, Elizabeth. Emily felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Andrew. The same Andrew who had seduced and abandoned her. The same Andrew who had left, leaving only a vague note and a positive pregnancy test on her bed. The father of her daughter was also Richard's son. Did you know, she asked, her voice barely coming out, when you accepted me here, pregnant? Did you know? Richard raised his eyes to her, and there was so much pain in his gaze that Emily felt her heart break. No, I only found out a week ago when I started investigating your baby's father, when the pieces began to fit together. So our daughter. Emily placed her hand on her belly, feeling a strong kick as if the baby was responding to the revelation. Is my granddaughter. Richard completed, his voice hoarse. And you. You are carrying the last piece of Elizabeth that exists in this world. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could hear her own heart beating, could feel every movement of the baby as if they were small earthquakes shaking her reality. What happens now? She finally asked, her voice small in the immense space between them. Richard stood up, walking toward her with slow, measured steps. When he reached her, his hands found her face, holding it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Now, he said, his voice trembling slightly, now we need to decide if what is being born between us is strong enough to survive this. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hands, the weight of his presence. When she opened them again, there was determination in her gaze. It is stronger, she said simply. It has to be. The revelation about Andrew changed everything, and nothing at the same time. The budding love between Emily and Richard now carried an even greater weight, but also an urgency that hadn't existed before. Each touch, each shared look, was a silent battle between desire and guilt, between what their hearts wanted and what morality dictated. It was on a particularly tense night that Andrew finally reappeared. Emily was in the garden, enjoying the fresh air of the early evening, when she heard the sound of tires at the entrance to the mansion. Her heart stopped when she recognized the familiar silhouette descending from a sports car. the same broad shoulders, the same confident walk that had seduced her months ago. "You're even more beautiful pregnant." His voice sounded exactly as in her memories, a mix of charm and arrogance. "My daughter suits you well? What are you doing here, Andrew?" Emily stood up, instinctively protecting her belly with her hands. "I came to meet my father." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "And discuss the future of my baby, of course." "There's nothing to discuss." Richard's voice sounded behind them, icy and controlled. Emily hadn't heard him approach, but his presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the garden. Andrew turned slowly, facing the man who was his biological father. The resemblance between them, now that Emily knew to look for it, was undeniable. The same clear eyes, the same authoritative posture. Richard Morgan. Andrew pronounced the name as if savoring each syllable. "Or should I call you father?" "You don't have that right." Richard took a step forward, subtly placing himself between Andrew and Emily. "Not after what you did." "What I did?" Andrew laughed, a sound without humor. "And what did you do, father? Abandoned my mother when she needed you most. Forced her into a life of secrets and lies. Your mother made her own choices." Richard's voice trembled slightly. "Choices that I only understood when it was already too late." "And now?" Andrew gestured toward Emily. "Are you repeating the pattern? Falling in love with the mother of your grandchild?" The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could feel the tension emanating from Richard, could see his hands closed into fists at his sides. "You know nothing about love," Richard finally answered, his voice low and dangerous. "You seduced an innocent woman, abandoned her pregnant, and now you come back demanding rights. Rights that are mine by blood." Andrew took a step forward, his face a mask of cold determination. "Or do you think the press wouldn't love to know that the great Richard Morgan is romantically involved with the woman carrying his granddaughter?" Emily felt her blood freeze. "You wouldn't do that?" "No?" Andrew smiled again, that smile that had once made her lose sleep. "Try to stop me." It was then that something unexpected happened. Richard, always so controlled, always so contained, crossed the distance between them in 3 large strides and grabbed Andrew by the collar of his shirt. "Listen carefully, boy." His voice was just a whisper, but it carried the weight of decades of power and influence. "You may be my blood, but that means nothing. Not after what you did. If you want war, you'll have war. But remember, I built an empire facing men much more dangerous than you." Andrew wriggled out of his grip, adjusting his shirt with fingers that trembled slightly. "You don't scare me, old man." "You should." Richard smiled, a smile that made Emily shiver. "Because unlike you, I have something to fight for. Something bigger than money or power." "What?" Andrew mocked. "Love? Family?" Richard turned to Emily, his eyes softening when they met hers. "True family. Something you clearly don't understand." It was at that moment that Emily felt it, a sharp, cutting pain that made her double over. Richard. In seconds, he was by her side, strong arms supporting her as she gasped, "Emily, what is it?" "The baby." She pressed her belly, feeling another spasm of pain. "Something's wrong." The world seemed to go into slow motion. Richard picked her up as if she weighed nothing, shouting orders to the servants. Andrew stood still, his face a mask of shock and perhaps, finally, guilt. "If anything happens to them," Richard growled over his shoulder as he carried Emily into the house, "you'll wish you never discovered who I am." The next few hours were a blur of pain and fear. The family doctor was urgently called, transforming Emily's room into a small medical unit. Dr. Richardson worked in silence, his face grave as he monitored Emily's and the baby's vital signs. Richard didn't leave her side for a moment, holding her hand through each contraction, each moment of panic. His hands, always so firm in business, trembled each time she moaned in pain. "I can't lose you," he whispered in her ear during a particularly difficult moment. "I can't lose anyone else I love." The word, love, hung between them like a promise, a confession wrung out by fear and the possibility of loss. Emily squeezed his hand harder, meeting his eyes. "You won't," she promised, her voice hoarse with pain. "You won't lose us." Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Richardson announced that the worst had passed. "Extreme stress," he explained, storing his equipment. "The pressure rose dangerously, but we managed to control it. Absolute rest until the end of the pregnancy." When the doctor left, Richard sat on the edge of the bed, his hands still intertwined with Emily's. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the room with golden tones that made everything seem like a distant dream. "Andrew?" Emily finally asked. "He left," Richard answered, his voice tired. "But he'll be back. Men like him always come back." "And us?" She touched his face, feeling the stubble under her fingers. "What are we now, Richard?" He turned his face to kiss her palm, a gesture of intimacy that made her heart race. "We are what we've always been. From the moment you entered this house, we are two broken people trying to build something whole. Even with all this, with who I am, with who you are." Richard leaned in, touching his forehead to hers, "Especially because of that, because now we're no longer pretending. We're no longer hiding our ghosts." "Is it wrong?" Emily whispered, her hand resting on the belly where her daughter, his granddaughter, was growing. "To feel what I feel for you? If it's wrong," he answered, his voice hoarse with emotion, "then I never want to be right again." And there, in the golden light of morning, with the weight of all the revelations still fresh in their minds, they kissed. It wasn't a kiss of unbridled passion, but of deep acceptance, of who they were, of what they felt, of the complicated future that awaited them. When they separated, Richard kept a protective hand over Emily's belly, as if through that touch he could protect the two women who had become his world. "He will come back," Emily said softly, "and when he does," Richard completed, his eyes hard as steel, "we'll be ready together." The forced rest transformed the dynamics of the mansion. Richard, against all the expectations of his partners and employees, started working more from home, converting a room adjacent to Emily's bedroom into a temporary office. The constant proximity between them created a different intimacy, deeper, truer than the initial explosion of desire they had experienced. Emily watched him during video calls with his team, admiring how he commanded his empire even from there, always keeping a watchful eye on any movement from her. In the breaks between meetings, he would come sit on the edge of her bed, sometimes just to touch her belly, and feel the increasingly strong movements of the baby. "She'll be a fighter," he commented on one of those afternoons when the baby was particularly agitated. Like her mother, Emily covered his hand with hers, feeling the contrast between their temperatures. "Like her grandfather, you mean?" It was the first time she had used that word, grandfather, and she could see the impact it had on Richard. His eyes softened in a way she rarely saw, and for a moment it seemed he was going to say something. Instead, he leaned in and kissed her, a slow and deep kiss that said everything words couldn't express. But the apparent peace was just the calm before the storm. The first sign of trouble came through Martha, who one morning entered the room carrying the newspaper with trembling hands. "Mr. Morgan, I think you need to see this." The headline was like a punch to the stomach. "Morgan Empire Lost Heir Emerges with Explosive Revelations." The photo showed Andrew impeccably dressed, leaving one of the city's most prestigious law offices. Richard read the article in silence, his posture becoming more rigid with each word. When he finished, he crumpled the newspaper with a force that made his fingers whiten. "He's playing hardball," Emily commented, her voice tense. "What are we going to do?" "What I've always done," Richard replied, his voice controlled, but laden with cold fury. "Protect what's mine." He left the room with determined steps, and Emily could hear his voice in the corridor giving orders on the phone. For the next few hours, a procession of lawyers and advisors passed through the mansion, all with grave expressions and folders, full of documents. It was only at night, when they were finally alone, that Richard revealed the extent of the problem. "Andrew doesn't just want money," he said, sitting heavily in the armchair next to Emily's bed. "He wants control of the company. He's using Elizabeth's story, your pregnancy, our relationship, everything as ammunition. He can't prove anything about us," Emily argued, but her voice trembled slightly. Richard looked at her with a mixture of tenderness and concern. He doesn't need to prove it. The mere suggestion would be enough to shake the shareholders' confidence. And with the DNA proving he's my son. But why now? Why not before? Debts. Richard stood up, beginning to pace the room. My investigators discovered that he's drowning in gambling debts. He owes dangerous people. The timing is no coincidence. He needs money, and he needs it fast. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. What kind of dangerous people? Richard stopped his pacing, turning to face her. There was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. The kind that doesn't accept no as an answer. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken implications. Emily could feel her daughter moving restlessly, as if responding to the tension in the air. There's one more thing. Richard approached the bed, sitting beside her and taking her hands in his. Andrew isn't alone in this. Someone is helping. Him, someone who knows the deepest secrets of the Morgan family. Who? Mr. Carter. The name hit Emily like lightning. The same lawyer who had mediated her agreement with Richard, who knew every detail of their marriage contract. He always... "Knew?" she asked, her voice barely coming out. He was Elizabeth's trusted lawyer too, Richard confirmed, his voice bitter. It was he who helped her disappear with the baby. All this time he kept the secret. Until now. Emily released one of her hands from Richard's grip to touch his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. What? Changed? I changed. He turned his face to kiss her palm, a gesture that had become so natural between them. When I realized I was falling in love with you, when I began to imagine a different future, I think it was too much for him. Mr. Carter was always devoted to Elizabeth's memory. Seeing you here, carrying my granddaughter, making me happy, must have seemed like a betrayal. The words, making me happiest, made Emily's heart race. It was the first time Richard had so openly admitted the effect she had on his life. And now? She asked softly. What do we do? Richard pulled her closer, careful because of her condition, until she was nestled against his chest. Now we fight, not just for the empire, not just for the money. We fight for us, for this strange and imperfect family we've built, even if it means facing your own son. He was silent for a moment, his hands absently caressing her hair. Andrew is my blood, yes, but you and this baby, you are my heart. And sometimes we have to choose between blood and heart. Emily raised her face to look at him, finding his clear eyes full of fierce determination. I love you. The words came out before she could contain them, and for a moment she feared she had said too much, too soon. But Richard just kissed her, a kiss that carried promises of protection, of devotion, of a future worth fighting for. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he whispered against her lips, and that's why I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe, even if it means facing all the ghosts of my past. That night, for the first time since she had arrived at the mansion, Emily slept in Richard's arms. The world outside might be crumbling, threats might be approaching from all sides, but there, wrapped in his warmth, with her daughter moving gently in her womb, she finally felt at home. But while they slept, car lights began to approach the mansion. The war that Richard had promised was about to begin, and none of them was truly prepared for what would come next. The attack came from where they least expected. The morning after the confession of love between Emily and Richard, Martha entered the room pale as a ghost, carrying not only the usual breakfast, but also a brown envelope. I found this under the front door, ma'am. The housekeeper hesitated before handing the envelope to Emily. It has your name on it. Richard, who had fallen asleep in the armchair next to the bed, instantly awakened at the sound of voices. His eyes, still clouded with sleep, immediately focused on the envelope in Emily's hands. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Emily pregnant in her old apartment, Emily entering the hospital where she worked, Emily and Andrew in previous encounters, always caught in intimate moments. And then, the most recent ones, Emily and Richard at the piano, their first kiss, stolen moments in the garden. But they weren't just photos. There were also medical documents, her own records from the hospital where she worked, detailing every consultation, every procedure, and most disturbing of all, there was a copy of a DNA test. He planned everything. Emily's voice trembled as she passed the documents to Richard. From the beginning, it wasn't a coincidence that he found me at that hospital, was it? Richard examined the papers with an increasingly grim expression. No. He knew exactly who you were. He knew you worked at the same hospital where Elizabeth had been a nurse, the same hospital that belongs to the Morgan Foundation. But why? Why all this elaboration? Because he needed something beyond DNA to hit me. Richard stood up, beginning to pace the room with contained energy. He needed a story that the press could devour, and what better story than this? The powerful Richard Morgan in love with the woman carrying his granddaughter, a young nurse from the same hospital where his first wife worked. Emily felt nausea rise in her throat. So I was just a piece in his game? Richard stopped his pacing, turning to her with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. You may have started as a piece in his game, but you became much more than that. You became my salvation. He approached the bed, sitting beside her, and taking her hands in his. Andrew may have planned our meeting, but he didn't plan this. He didn't plan that I would fall in love with you, that I would find in you not just a reminder of Elizabeth, but something entirely new, something real. His words warmed her heart, but didn't completely dispel her fear. And now? What do we do? Richard smiled, a smile that had something dangerous about it. Now we play his game, but by our own rules. He picked up his phone and made a quick call. In minutes, the mansion transformed into an operations center. Additional security was positioned at all strategic points. Surveillance cameras were installed, and a team of private investigators was mobilized. First rule of the corporate world, Richard explained, as he watched the movement through the bedroom window. Always have a contingency plan, and I have several. It was then that Emily felt it, that same sharp pain that had afflicted her days before, but this time it was different, more intense, more urgent. Richard. She barely managed to say his name before doubling over. In seconds he was by her side, his strong hands supporting her. Martha, call Dr. Richardson, now. The doctor arrived in record time, but his concerned eyes when examining Emily told them everything they needed to know. The baby is in distress, he announced, beginning to prepare his equipment. The pressure is very high. We need to deliver. Now. But it's too early, Emily protested, tears beginning to stream down her face. There are still 6 weeks to go. We don't have a choice. Dr. Richardson was already in full professional mode. If we wait, we could lose both. Richard visibly paled, but his voice remained firm. What do we need? An emergency cesarean. I've already alerted the team at the private hospital. Everything is prepared. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Emily was transferred to an ambulance, Richard never leaving her side, their hands intertwined as if they were a single entity. On the way to the hospital, between increasingly painful contractions, Emily saw something in Richard's eyes that she had never seen before, tears. Don't leave me, he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. I can't lose you too. I can't lose you both. Emily squeezed his hand with all the strength she could gather. You won't. I promise. But even as she made the promise, she could feel her consciousness beginning to waver. The voices around her began to sound distant, as if she was submerging in deep waters. The last thing she saw before darkness took over was Richard's face, his tears now flowing freely as he begged her to stay awake. And then, silence. When Emily returned to consciousness, the first thing she heard was a cry, small, sharp, but strong, a cry that made her heart race with a love so intense it hurt. She's perfect. Richard's voice sounded close to her ear. Perfect like her mother. Emily opened her eyes slowly, adjusting to the bright light of the hospital room. Richard was sitting beside her, holding a small pink bundle in his arms. His face showed clear signs of exhaustion and concern, but his eyes shone with something that could only be described as pure adoration. I want to see her, Emily whispered, her voice hoarse. Richard leaned in, placing the baby in her arms with infinite care. "Emily, meet Sophia." The name, which they had never discussed, caught her by surprise. "Sophia? It means wisdom," Richard explained, softly, his fingers caressing the baby's tiny face. "Because she's already wiser than all of us. She taught us that love has no rules, no limits, that family is more than blood." Emily looked at her daughter, so small, so perfect, with her tiny fingers and her button-shaped mouth, and felt tears begin to fall. "Will she be all right?" she asked, suddenly remembering the premature birth. "She will," Richard assured, sitting on the edge of the bed and enveloping them both with his arms. "She's strong, like her mother, like her grandmother." The mention of Elizabeth didn't bring the expected pain. Instead, Emily felt a strange peace, as if somehow the circle was closing. "Andrew," she began, but Richard interrupted her with a gentle kiss. "Later," he murmured against her lips. "Now is the time to celebrate our family. The rest can wait." And there, in that hospital room, with her daughter in her arms and the man she loved by her side, Emily finally understood that sometimes the truest love is born from the most unlikely situations. That family isn't something we find, but something we build day by day, choice after choice. Sophia opened her eyes, the same clear eyes as Richard, and looked directly at her, as if sealing that understanding with her own newborn wisdom. The peace of the family moment was brutally interrupted when Mr. Carter burst into the hospital room, his eyes wild and his breathing irregular. "You need to get out of here, now," he said, addressing Richard directly. "Andrew, he found out about the birth. He's coming with the press." Richard rose instantly, his body tense like a violin string about to snap. "How did he know?" "He has people infiltrated in the hospital." Mr. Carter ran a hand through his grey hair, a nervous gesture that betrayed his agitation. "Richard, I'm sorry for everything. I shouldn't have helped him, but you still love Elizabeth," Richard completed, his voice surprisingly soft, "even after all these years." The lawyer nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "She trusted me, made me promise I would protect Andrew, that I would ensure he had his inheritance when it was time." "And you think that's what you're doing?" Emily intervened, her voice weak but firm. "Helping him destroy everything Richard has built, Mr. Carter looked at her as if he truly saw her for the first time, not as a substitute for Elizabeth, but as herself. His gaze moved from Emily to Sophia, who slept peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the drama unfolding. "No," he finally answered. "That's not what I'm doing, and that's why I'm here now." He took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket. "These are all the evidence Andrew has against you, all the photos, all the documents, and this," he placed a flash drive on the table next to the bed. "These are the recordings of his conversations with the creditors, the kind of people he got involved with. They're not people you should mess with." Richard took the envelope and the flash drive, his eyes never leaving the lawyer's face. "Why?" "Because Elizabeth wouldn't want this," Mr. Carter answered simply. "She wanted to protect her son, yes, but not at the cost of destroying other lives. Not at the cost of his happiness," he pointed to Sophia, "or the happiness of this child." The sound of raised voices in the corridor interrupted the conversation. Mr. Carter moved quickly to the door. "I'll try to delay them. There's an emergency exit at the end of the corridor. Use it." Before he could leave, Richard called him. "Carter, thank you." The lawyer smiled sadly. "Don't thank me yet. The war is just beginning." As soon as he left, Richard sprang into action. With an efficiency born of years commanding crisis situations, he organized the transfer of Emily and Sophia to a private wing of the hospital on another floor, while his security team created a distraction at the main entrance. "How did you know this could happen?" Emily asked as she was transferred to the new room, Sophia still safe in her arms. "Because I know Andrew better than he thinks," Richard answered, checking the security cameras through his phone. "He is my son, after all. He has the same instinct for drama that I had at his age. The way he said my son, not with anger or resentment, but with a deep sadness. made Emily's heart ache. What will we do now? Richard sat on the edge of her new bed, one hand gently caressing Sophia's head, while the other held Emily's. Now we use his weapons against himself. He picked up his phone. Again making a series of quick calls, Emily watched him work, admiring how he maintained his calm even under extreme pressure. In 1 hour, he finally announced, we're going to give Andrew exactly what he wants. Media attention. What do you mean? Richard smiled, that smile that mixed danger and determination. I'm going to call a press conference, right here at the hospital. I'm going to tell the whole truth, about Elizabeth, about Andrew, about us. But I'm going to tell it our way. Are you sure? Emily asked, concern evident in her voice. Won't that destroy everything you've built? No. He picked up the flash drive that Mr. Carter had delivered. Because along with our story, I'm going to reveal exactly what kind of people Andrew got involved with. The Morgan Empire was built on ethical principles, on helping people through hospitals and foundations. When the press discovers that the supposed heir is involved with loan sharks and criminals, he'll lose all credibility, Emily completed, understanding the plan. Exactly. Richard leaned in, kissing her forehead softly. And more importantly, we're going to show the world that we have nothing to hide, that our love, as complicated as it may be, is real. As if responding to her grandfather's words, Sophia chose that moment to open her eyes and let out a small sound of contentment. Emily looked at her daughter, so small, so innocent, but already at the center of such a big storm, and felt a fierce determination grow in her chest. Do it, she said, her voice firm. Tell everything. I won't hide anymore. Richard looked at her with so much love that she felt her heart skip a beat. Are you sure? This will change your life forever. You'll never have privacy again. My life already changed forever the moment I entered that mansion. She smiled, adjusting Sophia in her arms, and I wouldn't change anything, not a single second. He kissed her then, a kiss that carried promises of future, of protection, of eternal love. When they separated, his eyes were shining with a mixture of determination and adoration. Martha is bringing appropriate clothes for you both, he said, switching back to pragmatic mode. In 1 hour, we're going to show the world who we really are. A family, imperfect, complicated, but real. Emily nodded, feeling a strange calm envelop her. She was no longer the frightened woman who had accepted a marriage contract out of desperation. She was a mother, a lover, a force of nature ready to fight for what was hers. A family. She repeated, looking at Sophia and then at Richard. It's all I ever wanted, all I ever needed. Outside, they could hear the growing buzz of the press gathering. The storm was coming, but this time they were ready to face it, together. The Maraso hospital auditorium was packed. Cameras, microphones, and anxious gazes turned to the improvised stage where Richard Morgan, impeccable in his dark suit, prepared to face the storm he himself had summoned. Emily watched everything through a monitor. In the room, Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms. Martha had brought an elegant, discreet navy blue dress, perfect for the moment when she would be called to join Richard, a moment that she knew would change their lives forever. Good afternoon, Richard's voice sounded firm through the speakers. Thank you all for coming. Today I am not here as the CEO of the Morgan Group, but as a man who has a story to tell. A story of love, loss, redemption, and hope. An expectant silence took over the auditorium. Richard took a photo from his pocket, the same photo of Elizabeth that Emily had found in the library. This is Elizabeth, he continued, his voice softening as he pronounced the name. My first wife, an extraordinary woman I met at this very hospital 23 years ago when she was a nurse in the pediatric ward. Camera flashes fired, capturing the image Richard was holding. Our love was intense, forbidden by the standards of the time. I was a divorced man, much older, considered unsuitable for a promising young woman like her, but we fell in love anyway. He paused, his eyes finding the camera that transmitted directly to Emily's room. Elizabeth became pregnant, and at that moment, we made a decision that would haunt me for the next 20 years. We decided to keep everything a secret." Murmurs ran through the audience. Richard continued, his voice now laden with contained emotion. "She disappeared before the birth. She left only a letter, saying she was protecting our son from the threats that surrounded my position, my empire. At the time, I didn't understand. Today, I know she was right." It was at that moment that Andrew burst into the auditorium, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "Lies! You abandoned her! You abandoned us!" Richard showed no surprise at the interruption. On the contrary, he seemed to have been expecting it. "No, Andrew, I never abandoned you. Your mother made a choice that cost me my heart but saved your life." He made a gesture, and on the large screens of the auditorium recordings began to be shown, the same ones from the flash drive that Mr. Carter had delivered. Andrew visibly paled as he heard his own voice negotiating with well-known figures from the criminal underworld. "These recordings," Richard continued, his voice now hard as steel, "show exactly why Elizabeth was right to fear for your safety. Power attracts dangerous people, son. People like those you got involved with." Andrew advanced toward the stage but was restrained by security guards. "You have no right to use her memory like this." "I have every right," Richard replied, his voice softening again. "Because unlike you, I learned the lesson she tried to teach us. That true love sometimes means giving up what we want for the good of those we love." He made another gesture, and new images appeared on the screens. Photos of Emily at the hospital where she worked, caring for patients, smiling with colleagues. "And that's how I met Emily." Richard continued, ignoring Andrew's protests. "A young nurse like your mother once was, but it wasn't that similarity that won me over." He looked directly at the camera again, and Emily felt her heart race when she saw the evident love in his eyes. It was her strength, her dignity even in the most difficult circumstances. And yes, she was pregnant with my biological son when we met. Yes, our arrangement began as a contract, but it transformed into something much greater. Richard made a subtle signal, and Emily knew it was her cue. Martha helped her with Sophia, and together they made their way to the auditorium. When the doors opened and she entered, carrying her newborn daughter, absolute silence fell over the audience. Andrew, still restrained by the security guards, stopped fighting when he saw them. His face showed a complex mixture of emotions, anger, confusion, and something that almost seemed like regret. Emily walked to the stage with her head held high, each step firm despite the fatigue of the recent birth. Richard extended his hand to help her up the steps, and when she reached his side, he protectively wrapped an arm around her. "This is my family," he announced, his voice laden with pride and emotion. "Emily, my wife, who taught me to love again, and Sophia, my granddaughter, who carries in her name all the wisdom we need to understand that family goes far beyond blood and conventions." Emily looked at the audience, at the cameras, at Andrew, who now seemed smaller, less threatening. "I'm not Elizabeth," she said, her voice clear and firm. "I never tried to be. I'm just a woman who fell in love with an extraordinary man, who learned that true love doesn't follow rules or expectations." Sophia chose that moment to open her eyes, letting out a small sound that echoed in the silence of the auditorium. Richard looked at his granddaughter with so much love that Emily felt tears begin to form in her eyes. "So yes, this is our story," he continued, facing the cameras with determination. "It's not a conventional story. It's not a story that everyone will understand or accept. But it's our story, and we're tired of hiding it." Andrew finally managed to break free from the security guards, but instead of attacking, he simply stood there, looking at the baby in Emily's arms, his daughter, the granddaughter of the man he had tried to destroy. His voice faltered. "She has his eyes, the same eyes as Mom." "Yes," Emily responded softly. "She has the Morgan eyes, like you." Something seemed to break inside Andrew at that moment. His shoulders fell, and for the first time since this whole story began, he seemed truly young and lost. "I just wanted—" he began but couldn't finish. "I know," Richard said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "You wanted to be recognized. You wanted your place. But son, your place was never at the helm of a company. Your place is here as part of this family." If you want it. The silence that followed was heavy with possibilities. Emily could feel the weight of the moment, the delicate balance between destruction and redemption. And then Sophia began to cry, a strong, healthy cry, full of life. The sound seemed to break something in the tense atmosphere of the auditorium. Andrew took a step forward, then another, until he was at the foot of the stage. "Can I—" He hesitated. "Can I meet my daughter?" Emily looked at Richard, who nodded, slightly. Together they descended the steps of the stage, approaching Andrew with Sophia. And there, under the lights of the flashes and the buzz of the cameras, 3 generations of the Morgan family met in a moment of pure truth, not the truth of the tabloids or the boardrooms, but the simple and profound truth of family love. The storm had passed, and in its place, something new was born, something real. The return to the Eade mansion 3 days later was different from anything Emily could have imagined. The media storm that followed the press conference had transformed their story into a national phenomenon. Headlines, speculations, endless analyses about the Morgan Empire and its complicated dynasty. But inside the car, with Sophia sleeping, in her baby carrier and Richard at the wheel, none of that seemed to matter. The silence between them was comfortable, full of promises and possibilities. Andrew accepted the hospitalization. Richard broke the silence when they entered the gates of the property. "The rehabilitation clinic is one of the best in the country." Emily nodded, her hand resting protectively over Sophia. "He'll make it. I saw it in his eyes when he held Sophia for the first time. There's goodness there. The same goodness that Elizabeth must have seen in you." Richard parked the car, but made no move to get out. Instead, he turned to her with an intensity that made her heart race. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See the best in people, in me and Andrew, even after everything." Emily smiled, reaching out to touch his face. "Because it's what Elizabeth would do. Not because I try to be like her, but because I understand now why she fell in love with you, why she risked everything for that love." Richard captured her hand, kissing her palm with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I didn't deserve her, just as I don't deserve you." Emily smiled, reaching out to touch his face. "Because it's what Elizabeth would do. Not because I try to be like her, but because I understand now why she fell in love with you. Why she risked everything for that love." Richard captured her hand, kissing her palm with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "I didn't deserve her, just as I don't deserve you." "Love isn't a matter of deserving," Emily answered softly. "It's a matter of choosing every day, even when it's difficult, even when the whole world says it's wrong." The sound of Sophia stirring in the back seat broke the moment. Richard got out of the car, coming around to help Emily with the baby. Together they climbed the steps of the mansion, no longer a prison of secrets, but a home under construction. Martha was waiting at the entrance, her eyes shining with contained tears, at the sight of Sophia. "Welcome home, my Morgan ladies." The housekeeper's formality made Emily smile. Some things would never change, and perhaps they didn't need to change. It was when they entered the main hall that Emily noticed. The covered paintings, which had so intrigued her upon her arrival, were uncovered. Portraits of Elizabeth, young and radiant, now decorated the walls alongside other memories of the Morgan family. "We don't need to hide the past anymore," Richard explained, noticing her surprised look. "It's part of who we are, of how we got here." Emily stopped in front of one of the portraits, Elizabeth in her nurse's uniform, smiling at the camera with eyes full of life. "She would be proud of you, of Andrew, of the family we're building." Richard embraced her from behind, his arms enveloping both her and Sophia. "She would be proud of you, for doing what she couldn't, facing the world with your head held high, fighting for our love without fear of the consequences." The moment was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Martha hurried to answer, returning with a curious expression. "Mr. Carter is here." The lawyer entered the hall looking older and more tired than ever. In his hands he carried an old wooden box. "Elizabeth gave this to me before Before she left, he explained, extending the box to Emily. She asked me to keep it until I found someone worthy of receiving it, someone who understood the true meaning of family. With trembling hands, Emily opened the box. Inside was a diary, several old photos, and a letter addressed simply to "Whoever loves Richard after me." "I'll leave you to read it in privacy," Mr. Carter said softly. "I just came to fulfill my last promise to her." After he left, Emily sat in the music room, the place where her love with Richard had first revealed itself. With Sophia sleeping in her lap and Richard at her side, she carefully opened the letter with reverent care. "Dear friend, if you're reading this, it means you found your way to Richard Morgan's heart. It couldn't have been easy. He built so many walls around himself, so many defenses against love. But you succeeded, as I did, so long ago. I don't know who you are, or how your story with him began. But I know you must be special. Richard doesn't give his heart easily. Perhaps you've heard about me. Perhaps you've wondered if you're just a substitute, an echo of what we were. You're not. Richard has a bigger heart than he himself realizes. He has the capacity to love in different ways, deeper each time. His love for you is not a repetition of ours. It's something new, unique, special. I ask only one thing. Love him completely. Love his flaws, his scars, his shadows. Love the strength he hides under that mask of power. And most importantly, help him forgive himself. Forgive our mistakes, our choices. And if, as I suspect, my son Andrew crosses your path, because destiny has these ironies, help him too. He grew up without a father, carrying the weight of secrets too big for a child. But he has his father's heart, even if he doesn't know it yet. True love doesn't compete with ghosts. It transforms them into guardian angels, into memories that make us stronger. Be happy with him. Be the family we couldn't be. With eternal affection, Elizabeth. When Emily finished reading, tears were flowing freely down her face. Richard, who had read over her shoulder, had misty eyes. "She always knew," he murmured, his voice hoarse with emotion. "She always knew that one day I would find you." Emily turned to him, Sophia still nestled between them. And she did. Through paths no one could predict, but she did. Richard kissed her then, a kiss that carried the weight of all the stories that had brought them here. The past, the present, and the future, merging in a moment of absolute truth. Sophia stirred between them, letting out a small, contented sigh. And in that moment, in the room where so many secrets had been revealed, a new story was beginning to be written. A story of love that transcended conventions, that transformed pain into healing, that proved that family is much more than blood or tradition. A story that, as Elizabeth predicted, would be unique and special. Their story. The months that followed brought profound changes to the Morgan mansion. The old silence was replaced by Sophia's occasional crying, by the whispered conversations between Emily and Richard in the early hours of feeding, by the sound of the piano that now played more frequently, not just Chopin's Nocturne, but new melodies, happier ones, as if the house itself was learning to smile again. It was on one of these nights, when Sophia had finally fallen asleep after a particularly difficult feeding, that Richard surprised Emily with an unexpected proposal. "I want to transform the West Wing," he said, watching her place the baby in the crib with infinite care. "It can no longer be a memorial of sadness. It needs to become something new." Emily looked at him curiously. Since returning from the hospital, that part of the house had remained closed, like a last bastion of the secrets of the past. "And what do you have in mind?" Richard approached the crib, his fingers gently brushing Sophia's dark hair. "A pediatric wing. Not here, of course, but at the hospital. The Elizabeth Morgan wing, a place where other young mothers can find the support she didn't have." The proposal made Emily's heart race. It was so perfectly fitting, a way to honor the past while building something new, something meaningful. "And what about the wing here in the mansion?" Richard smiled, that smile that still made her stomach flutter. I thought about transforming it into a space for Andrew, for when he's ready to come back. The mention of Andrew's name no longer brought the old anguish. In recent months, his progress in rehabilitation had been remarkable. The letters he sent weekly showed a different man emerging from the shadows of bitterness and resentment. "He'll like that," Emily said softly, intertwining her fingers with Richard's over Sophia's crib. Having his own space here. Being part of the family for real. Richard pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You did this. You transformed this house of ghosts into a true home." "We did this," she corrected, raising her face to look at him. "Together." The kiss that followed was different from the others. There was no longer desperate urgency, nor the bittersweet taste of a forbidden love. It was the kiss of two people who had found their place in the world, who had transformed an unlikely story into something profoundly real. "Marry me," Richard murmured against her lips. Emily pulled away slightly, confused. "But we're already married." "No," he smiled, caressing her face. "I want to marry you for real. Not by contract, not for convenience. I want to make true vows in front of everyone. I want the whole world to know that I choose you, every day, forever." The words hit her with full force, bringing tears to her eyes. "Richard—" "Wait," he moved away, going to the antique dresser that decorated the baby's room. From a drawer he took a small velvet box. "This was my mother's, and before her, her mother's. It's a Morgan tradition, passing this ring to the woman who truly captures the heart of a man in the family." When he opened the box, Emily gasped. The ring was an antique and delicate piece, a central ruby surrounded by small diamonds, mounted in aged rose gold. "Elizabeth never wore it," Richard continued, his voice soft. "We couldn't have a public ceremony, so I kept the ring stored away. I think somehow it was waiting for you." With trembling hands, Emily allowed him to slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "So?" Richard asked, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that made her love him even more. "Will you marry me again? This time for love, only for love." In response, Emily kissed him. She put into that kiss all the love she felt, all the gratitude for the path that had brought them here, all the promise of the future they would build together. Sophia chose that moment to wake up, her soft cry filling the room. They separated laughing, and Emily realized that this was how it would always be, moments of passion interspersed with the demands of real life, of love in its most practical and true form. "I think she's giving her approval," Richard joked, picking up his daughter with a naturalness that still surprised her. It was hard to associate this gentle and caring man with the Richard Morgan she had met on that first day in his office. "She knows what's best for us," Emily replied, watching father and daughter with a heart overflowing with love. She always did. As Richard rocked Sophia, softly humming an old lullaby, Emily approached the window. Outside, the gardens of the mansion gleamed under the moonlight, no longer a Gothic setting of mysteries and secrets, but a place of peace and possibilities. Somewhere in those gardens, she thought, Elizabeth's spirit must be smiling, not as a haunting ghost, but as a blessing angel. Because sometimes the truest love is the one born from the ashes of other stories, that transforms pain into healing, that proves the heart has an infinite capacity to start anew. "What are you thinking about?" Richard asked, approaching with Sophia now calmer in his arms. Emily turned to her family, the family she had found in the most unlikely way possible, and smiled. "I'm thinking that sometimes we need to get completely lost to find our true way home." Richard pulled her to join them, forming a perfect family embrace. "Welcome home, Mrs. Morgan." And there, in the room that had once been just another empty space in the mansion of secrets, Emily knew she was finally where she was meant to be, not as a substitute for a past love, not as a piece in a power game, but as herself, loved, lover, mother, wife, a Morgan by choice, by love, by destiny. The inauguration ceremony of the Elizabeth Morgan wing took place on a golden spring afternoon, 6 months after Sophia's birth. The hospital was decorated with white flowers, and Elizabeth's portrait, young, smiling in her nurse's uniform, occupied a place of honor in the main lobby. Emily was nervous. It was her first official appearance as Mrs. Morgan since the renewed wedding, an intimate but exciting ceremony that had taken place in the mansion's garden 2 weeks before. The simple white dress she had chosen for that day still hung in her closet, a reminder of the moment when she and Richard had exchanged true vows, this time born of love and not necessity. "Ready?" Richard's voice brought her back to the present. He looked magnificent in his dark suit, but it was his eyes that captured her attention. They shone with a mixture of pride and love that still left her breathless. Almost. She adjusted Sophia in her arms. The baby was especially beautiful in her light blue dress, her eyes so similar to her grandfather's, observing everything with curiosity. A movement at the door caught her attention. Andrew was there, hesitant, thinner, and with deep, dark circles, but with a new gleam in his eyes, the gleam of someone who was finally finding his way. Can I hold her?" he asked, his voice still carrying traces of the insecurity that rehabilitation was slowly helping to cure. Emily exchanged a quick glance with Richard before handing Sophia to her father's arms. Andrew held her with reverent care, as if she were made of crystal. "Hi, Princess," he whispered, and there was so much love in his voice that Emily felt tears form in her eyes. "Daddy's here." Richard approached, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. The gesture, simple but loaded with meaning, made Andrew raise his eyes so similar to his father's. "Thank you," Andrew said simply, "for not giving up on me." "Family doesn't give up on each other," Richard answered, his voice hoarse, with emotion. "Your mother taught me that. Emily reminded me." The moment was interrupted by Martha, who appeared to announce that the guests were arriving. Andrew returned Sophia to Emily, not without first gently kissing his daughter's forehead. I'll be in the audience," he said, straightening his shoulders, "supporting you." After he left, Richard pulled Emily into his arms, careful not to crush Sophia between them. "Are you okay?" "Better than okay," she smiled, adjusting his tie with her free hand. "I'm exactly where I should be." The inauguration speech was moving. Richard spoke about second chances, about how love has the power to transform tragedies into new beginnings. He spoke about Elizabeth, about how her spirit of care and compassion would live on through the work done in the new wing. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she handed Sophia to Martha and walked to the podium with firm steps. The audience, a mixture of doctors, nurses, authorities, and press, watched her expectantly. "Many of you knew me as a nurse at this same hospital," she began, her voice clear and firm. "Others met me through the headlines that surrounded my story with Richard, but today I want to talk about family." She paused, her eyes finding first Andrew in the audience, then Richard at her side. Family isn't just blood. It isn't just tradition or name. Family is choice, it's forgiveness, it's the courage to look beyond the wounds of the past and see the possibilities of the future. The Elizabeth Morgan Wing will not just be a place of physical healing. It will be a sanctuary for families in formation, in transformation, in reconstruction. Her hand unconsciously touched the ruby ring on her finger, the ring that carried generations of Morgan history, but now told a new story. Elizabeth Morgan was more than a dedicated nurse, more than a woman who loved deeply. She was someone who understood that sometimes we need to lose everything to find something greater. Her legacy isn't just in the walls of this place, but in the hearts she touched, in the lives she changed, in the family that, in ways no one could predict, she helped create. Richard approached, intertwining his fingers with hers. Sophia, in Martha's arms, let out a small laugh that echoed through the hall, and Andrew, sitting in the front row, smiled through silent tears. "This wing is more than a memorial," Emily continued, her voice now soft with emotion. "It's a promise that love in all its complex and unexpected forms has healing power, a promise that there is no story that cannot be rewritten, no heart that cannot be healed." When she finished her speech, The silence that fell over the hall was broken by emotional applause. Richard kissed her right there in front of everyone, a kiss that sealed not just their love, but the complete transformation of their lives. Later, when they were returning to the mansion, Andrew in the back seat with Sophia, Richard driving, Emily watching the city pass by through the window, she thought about how life could change in a year, how a cold contract could transform into the deepest love story she had ever lived, how a house of secrets could become a real home. "What are you thinking?" Richard asked, his hand finding hers over the car console. Emily smiled, looking in the rearview mirror to see Andrew making faces to make Sophia laugh. "I'm thinking that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as impossible challenges." Richard brought her hand to his lips, kissing the ring that now symbolized not just their union, but all the journey that had brought them there. "And sometimes," he completed softly, "the greatest loves are born in the most unlikely places." Sophia laughed again, a pure and joyful sound that seemed to agree with her grandfather's words. And Emily knew with a certainty that came from the deepest part of her being that this was her true love story. A story that no longer needed contracts or secrets, a story that proved that true love has no rules, no limits, no explanations. Story that was just beginning. Sophia's first birthday transformed the Morgan mansion into a celebration scene that no one could have imagined a year before. The garden, where Richard used to walk alone during his sleepless nights, was now decorated with flowers and ribbons, the sound of laughter replacing the former sepulchral silence. Emily observed the scene from the veranda, her heart overflowing with emotion. Andrew played with Sophia on the grass, teaching her to take her first faltering steps. Richard, at her side, had that look of admiration that still made her melt inside. "It feels like a dream, doesn't it?" she murmured, leaning back against his chest. Richard embraced her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up." The sound of more cars arriving caught their attention. Mr. Carter, now no longer, just the family lawyer, but a close friend, was leading a group of nurses from the Elizabeth Morgan wing. They were the same professionals who had worked with Emily in her days at the public hospital, now an integral part of the project that was transforming lives. Emily, Maria, her former supervisor, waved enthusiastically. "We brought a surprise for the birthday girl." The surprise was a photo album, not just any album, but a compilation of images of the babies who had been born in the new wing of the hospital during its first year of operation. Dozens of stories of hope and new beginnings, all made possible thanks to the transformation of a tragedy into a legacy. "Look at this one." Maria pointed to a particular photo, a young single mother with her newborn baby. She arrived desperate. With nowhere to go, now she's living in the support shelter, finishing her nursing degree. Emily felt tears form in her eyes. This was exactly what she and Richard had dreamed of when they conceived the project. Not just a hospital, but a place of real transformation. Andrew approached, carrying Sophia, who was laughing happily. "Look who wants to give Mommy a hug." Emily took her daughter in her arms, covering her little face with kisses. Sophia was beautiful in her party dress, the clear Morgan eyes shining with pure joy. "Mama!" Sophia babbled, one of her first words, making everyone around smile. It was at that moment that Martha appeared on the veranda, carrying a brown envelope. "Mr. Morgan, this just arrived for you. It's from the registry office." Richard opened the envelope with curiosity, his eyes quickly scanning the official document. Suddenly his expression changed, a mixture of shock and emotion that made Emily hold her breath. "What is it?" she asked, concerned. In response, Richard extended the document to Andrew. "Son, it's done, officially." Andrew took the papers with trembling hands. It was his birth certificate, now rectified, officially carrying the Morgan name, but it wasn't just that. Attached were other documents, papers that made him officially vice president of the Morgan Foundation, responsible for all the group's social projects. "Dad." Andrew's voice faltered, and for the first time since they had met him, there was no bitterness or resentment in his eyes, only gratitude and love. Richard pulled him into a tight hug, the kind of embrace that years of distance and secrets had stolen from them. "Welcome to the family, son. Officially." Emily watched the scene, with an overflowing heart, Sophia still in her arms. The little one stretched her tiny arms toward her father and grandfather, as if she wanted to be part of that moment too. "Grandpa," she called, her second favorite word after mommy. Richard separated from Andrew to take his granddaughter, his eyes shining with contained tears. "That's right, Princess. Grandpa is here, we're all here." Martha chose that moment to announce that the cake was ready. As everyone headed to the area where the party was set up, Emily held Richard back for a moment. "I have a present for you too," she said softly, taking a small envelope from her pocket. Richard opened the envelope with curiosity, and his face transformed when he saw what was inside. An ultrasound image, still nebulous but unmistakably showing a small being in formation. "Emily." His voice was just a whisper. "Are you—" She nodded, tears of happiness streaming down her face. 10 weeks. Dr. Richardson confirmed yesterday." Richard pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that rivaled their first kisses in the music room. When they separated, both were crying and laughing at the same time. "This time," he said, his forehead resting against hers, "we'll do everything differently. No secrets, no fears, just love." "Just love," she agreed, her hand finding his over her still flat belly. The sound of Sophia laughing under Andrew's care brought them back to the present moment. The birthday party was waiting for them, not just a celebration of Sophia's first year of life, but a celebration of everything they had achieved, of all the barriers they had overcome. As they walked hand in hand toward the party, Emily looked at the mansion that had once seemed so frightening. The windows were now all open, letting in light and fresh air. The portraits on the walls were no longer painful memories, but part of a bigger story, a love story that transcended time and circumstances. "You know what I like most about this house now?" she asked Richard. "What?" "The sound." Emily smiled, hearing the laughter and conversations that echoed through the corridors. "It's no longer a house of silences, it's a house of life." Richard kissed her softly, his touch still able to make her heart race after all this time. "It's a house of love, as it always should have been." And there, under the afternoon sun that painted everything in golden tones, surrounded by family and friends, with a future full of promises growing in her womb, Emily knew they had finally found the true meaning of home. It wasn't a place, it wasn't a name, it was this love that grew and transformed, that healed and renewed, that proved that sometimes the greatest miracles are born from the most desperate moments. It was their story, a story that would continue to be written, page after page, with ink made of love, forgiveness, and hope. Time has a peculiar way of healing wounds and transforming stories. 5 years passed since that first time Emily crossed the doors of the Morgan mansion, desperate and pregnant, not knowing she was about to find not just security, but the kind of love that transforms lives. The mansion, once a mausoleum of secrets, now vibrated with life. Sophia, now 6 years old, ran through the corridors with her younger sister Elizabeth, 4 years old, the two carrying the beauty and strength of the women who marked the history of the Morgans. Their laughter echoed through the rooms like music, chasing away any shadow that might still try to hide in the corners. Andrew had married the previous year to one of the doctors from the Elizabeth Morgan wing, a strong and compassionate woman who had helped him in his final steps of recovery. Together they commanded the group's social projects with a dedication that made Richard overflow with pride. It was a Sunday afternoon when Emily found the last letter. She was organizing Richard's old office, now transformed into a more welcoming space where he spent his afternoons playing with his granddaughters, when a yellowed envelope fell from inside a dusty book. Her heart stopped when she recognized the handwriting. It was from Elizabeth, but different from the other letters they had found years ago. This one seemed more recent, the paper less aged. "Richard, if you're reading this, it means you've finally found your way back to the light. Mr. Carter promised to deliver this letter only when he was certain that you had really learned to love again. Don't blame yourself anymore for what happened to us. Every choice I made was mine. Moved by love, by fear, by hope. Andrew grew up strong even without you, and now I know he has found his way back home, as I always knew would happen. But this letter isn't about the past. It's about your future. About the woman who must be by your side now. The woman who had the courage to face your demons and show that love is stronger than any shadow. Tell her I'm grateful. Not just for loving you, but for having the courage that I didn't have. To face the world, to transform tragedy into triumph. To show that family is something we build with love and truth, not with secrets and fears. And Richard, be happy. Truly happy. It's all I ever wanted for you. With eternal love, Elizabeth. Emily felt strong arms embrace her from behind. Richard, who had entered the office silently. "When?" she began, her voice choked with emotion. "Mr. Carter gave it to me this morning," Richard answered softly, his fingers caressing the tiny face of the baby. He said it was time, that we had finally proven that we deserved this last message from her. Emily turned in his arms, finding those clear eyes that still made her heart skip a beat. She always knew, didn't she, that one day we would find this love. She knew much more than all of us. Richard smiled, that smile that was reserved only for her. She knew that sometimes we need to lose everything to find something greater. The sound of footsteps running down the corridor interrupted them. Sophia and Elizabeth burst into the office, followed by Andrew and his wife Maria. "Grandpa, Grandpa," Sophia called, her eyes, so similar to her grandfather's, shining with excitement. "Tell that story again, about how you and Grandma fell in love." Richard laughed, picking up his granddaughter. "Again? Haven't you memorized every detail yet?" "But it's the best story," Elizabeth protested, jumping into Emily's arms, "especially the piano part." Andrew approached, one arm around Maria's waist, who carried her own 6-month pregnancy. "They're right, Dad. It's a story that deserves to be told over and over." Emily observed her family gathered, this small miracle they had built from the ashes of other stories, and felt her heart overflow with love. "Then tell it, my love," she smiled at Richard. "Tell how a house of secrets transformed into a home of love." Richard sat in his favorite armchair, Sophia in his lap, Elizabeth snuggling beside him. Andrew and Maria settled on the nearby sofa, while Emily remained standing, Elizabeth's letter still in her hands, a final link between the past and the present, between pain and healing. "Once upon a time," Richard began, his voice laden with emotion, "a young nurse entered this mansion thinking she was making a deal, but ended up finding a love greater than any contract." And as the family story unfolded once more, Emily looked out the office window. The sun was setting over the gardens of the Morgan mansion, painting the sky in tones of pink and gold. Somewhere, she thought, Elizabeth was smiling. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go. Letting new stories bloom, letting new loves be born, letting old wounds transform into scars that make us stronger. This was her story now, a love story that transcended conventions, that proved that family is much more than blood or name. A story that would continue to be told, generation after generation, as a testament to the transformative power of true love. And in the Morgan mansion, where once there was only silence and secrets, now echoed laughter, stories, and promises of a bright future, a future built on the strongest foundations that exist, love, forgiveness, and the courage to believe that there is always room to begin again. 10 years later, the autumn sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the private chapel of the Morgan mansion, where Sophia, now 16, played the same Chopin's nocturne that her mother used to play years ago. Her fingers glided over the keys with the same grace that Emily demonstrated, but there was something more in her interpretation, a luminous joy that transformed the old melancholy melody into something new and hopeful. Emily watched her daughter from the chapel bench, her hand intertwined with Richard's. Time had painted more silver threads in his hair, but his clear eyes still shone with the same intense love that had won her over a decade ago. Elizabeth, at 15, sat next to her, sister at the piano, turning the pages of the sheet music. The two were inseparable, sharing not only the Morgan blood, but also a deep understanding of the extraordinary story that had united their family. Andrew entered silently with his wife, Maria, and their 9-year-old twins, Lucas and Laura. He had become a different man, strong, compassionate, a present father who had learned from the mistakes of the past to build his own legacy of love. "They play better and better," he commented quietly, sitting beside Emily. "Mom would be proud." There was no more pain in his voice when mentioning Elizabeth, just a gentle longing, the kind of memory that warms the heart instead of hurting it. "She is proud," Emily answered, squeezing his hand affectionately. "Of all of us." The Morgan mansion had transformed over the years. The old shadows in the corridors gave way to photographs of happy moments: birthdays, graduations, weddings, births. The West Wing, once forbidden, now housed a small museum that told the story of the family and the Morgan Foundation, including a room dedicated to Elizabeth and her legacy of love and healing. The Elizabeth Morgan wing at the hospital had become a model of humanized care, inspiring similar projects throughout the country. Andrew and Maria coordinated a support network that had already helped thousands of families find their own path to redemption. Richard stood up when the music ended, applauding with pride. "Perfect, my princesses. Absolutely perfect." Sophia smiled, that same smile that Emily had, capable of lighting up any environment. "Grandpa, tell us again how this music was special for you and Grandma." Even after so many years, the request still made Emily's heart race. Richard looked at her with that love that had only grown with time, before sitting at the piano with his granddaughters. "It was a stormy night," he began, his hands finding the keys with ease. "Your grandmother was playing this music, thinking she was alone." As the family story unfolded once more, Emily closed her eyes, letting the memories flow. The fear of that first night in the mansion, the gradual discovery of love, the pain of the truth about Andrew, the miracle of Sophia's birth, the joy of building a true family from the ashes of ancient tragedies. Elizabeth's last letter was framed in her room, no longer a ghost from the past, but a constant reminder of how true love has the power to transcend time, pain, and circumstances. "Mom?" Elizabeth's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you crying?" Emily smiled through the tears, pulling her daughter into a hug. "They're happy tears, my love, tears of gratitude." Richard finished the music, and for a moment, the silence in the chapel was absolute. Not a silence of secrets or sorrows, but the kind of sacred silence that precedes the most significant moments of life. "You know," he said, looking at his gathered family, "they say there are two types of love in the world. The type we consume that burns quick and intense like fire, and the type we build that grows slow and deep like a centennial tree." He extended his hand to Emily, who joined him on the piano bench. "We were lucky enough to find both. The fire that united us and the strength that kept us together." Sophia played a few soft notes of the nocturne, and this music, Emily answered, leaning against Richard's shoulder, "is the soundtrack of our story, a story that began with fear and secrets, but transformed into something much greater." "A love story?" Elizabeth asked, her eyes shining. "Not just of love?" Richard smiled, embracing his family. "A story of redemption, of forgiveness, of how sometimes we need to completely lose our way to find our true path home." And there, in the chapel of the Morgan mansion, where so many prayers had been whispered and so many tears shed, a new melody began to be played, no longer the solitary nocturne of years past, but a symphony of love, family, and hope. A music that would continue to echo through the corridors of the mansion, through the generations, telling the story of how a cold contract transformed into the truest love that ever existed. Because in the end, it's not secrets that define a family, but the love we choose to build day after day, note after note, until all the shadows of the past transform into the brightest light of the future. And in the Morgan mansion, that light would never fade again.